Florida was drowning in giant pythons, wiping out raccoons, deer, even alligators. Nothing worked, not hunters, not bounties, not even dogs. So the state tried something so shocking people laughed, releasing hundreds of snake killers into the wild. Everyone thought it was reckless, even insane. But then, something unbelievable happened. The predators began to spread, hatchlings were born in the wild, and the entire balance of nature started to shift before our eyes. Let's discover Florida's infamous gamble: snakes versus snakes. Florida was mocked around the world for one of the strangest sounding experiments in modern wildlife history. Headlines called it absurd. Commentators laughed at the idea. Strangers on the internet turned it into a meme. The accusation was simple: Florida had lost its mind. The state, already known for bizarre wildlife stories, was releasing even more snakes into the wild. People asked, almost sarcastically, how do you solve a snake problem? By releasing more snakes. The whole thing seemed reckless, confusing, even dangerous. Why add predators to an ecosystem already overrun by one of the most destructive invasive species in America? Could releasing hundreds of snake killers really work, or was this just another desperate move destined to fail? The plan sounded like something out of a science fiction story, but it was rooted in cold ecological logic. Florida was being overrun by Burmese pythons, enormous invasive snakes that could grow over 15 feet long, with some specimens reaching lengths of more than 18 feet. These animals were swallowing deer, birds, and even alligators whole, while wiping out small mammals like rabbits and raccoons almost entirely in some areas of the Everglades. Traditional control efforts were not working. Hunting programs had some effect, but for every python caught, dozens more went undetected in the swamps. Dogs trained to sniff them out, professional bounty hunters, even radio-tagged scout snakes used to track down breeding females. None of these strategies slowed the invasion enough. Florida's ecosystem was losing the battle. Against this backdrop, biologists and conservationists proposed something radical: releasing the eastern indigo snake back into the wild. On the surface, it sounded insane. After all, this was another snake. Why would anyone unleash more serpents into an already snake-infested landscape? The answer, however, lay in the indigo's biology. Unlike the Burmese python, the eastern indigo is not an invasive predator. It is a native species, once common across the southeastern United States before disappearing due to habitat loss, road deaths, hunting, and the pet trade. The eastern indigo is an apex predator in its own right, one that is uniquely adapted to controlling some of the very creatures that thrived in the python's shadow. What made the indigo particularly intriguing was its immunity to the venom of North America's most dangerous snakes. An indigo can face off against a rattlesnake, a cottonmouth, or a coral snake and win. It does not hesitate to grab them, crush them, and swallow them whole. It also preys on rodents, lizards, birds, and, crucially, young Burmese pythons. Scientists understood that no snake, not even the indigo, could eliminate full-grown pythons stretching over 15 feet. But by targeting young snakes before they reached breeding size, the indigo could slow the python population's growth from the bottom up. The idea was to tip the scales of balance back toward native wildlife by reintroducing a missing predator. Still, the idea drew ridicule. Critics painted the plan as reckless meddling with nature. Wouldn't releasing another snake just make the problem worse? Could Florida really justify unleashing hundreds of reptiles into the wild in hopes that they would hunt other reptiles? To the casual observer, it seemed like a recipe for disaster. Yet the conservationists behind the program argued the opposite. The eastern indigo belonged to Florida's ecosystems all along. Its disappearance decades earlier was part of the reason small mammal populations had become so vulnerable. Restoring it was not a gamble without reason, it was an attempt to repair what had been broken. Here is the real twist: despite the skepticism, the plan is working. Since 2017, hundreds of captive-bred eastern indigo snakes have been carefully released into select habitats in Florida. Each release site was chosen to maximize survival places with longleaf pine forests, gopher tortoise burrows for shelter, and access to diverse prey. The releases were monitored closely with tracking equipment, ensuring scientists could follow the snake's movements, diets, and survival rates. 4 years, The program operated under a cloud of doubt, with many waiting for proof that these snakes were not just surviving, but thriving. Then, in 2022 and 2023, the breakthrough came. Confirmed wild-born hatchlings, the first in decades, were documented. This was the evidence scientists had been waiting for, that the indigo snakes were successfully reproducing on their own. Think about that for a moment. A species declared endangered in the late 1970s, a species thought to be lost from much of Florida, was actually producing a new wild generation. For the first time in nearly half a century, indigo snakes were being born in the wild of Florida again. And the success did not stop there. Reports of indigos have started to come in from multiple counties, suggesting the population is slowly spreading. What once sounded like a laughable headline, "Florida fights snakes with snakes," now looks very different. Why did the world laugh at Florida's plan in the first place? Because it challenged the way people usually think about ecological problems. Most people assume you fight invasive species with traps, poisons, or human hunters. Releasing another predator seems like something out of a poorly thought-out movie plot. But in this case, the indigo was the missing piece of an ecosystem puzzle, a native snake returning to its rightful role. Florida's infamous gamble has not only revived a native species but has forced scientists, policymakers, and the public to rethink what bold environmental action. The backstory, how things got so bad. What scientists have uncovered in Florida is almost belief. Recent surveys have revealed that in some areas of the Everglades, raccoon populations have been reduced by 99%, rabbits and opossums have practically vanished, and even young deer are being swallowed before they ever reach maturity. Perhaps most shocking of all, there are documented cases of massive Burmese pythons overpowering and consuming full-grown alligators. An animal that once symbolized the Everglades as a top predator is now being devoured by an invader that should never have been there in the first place. How did the situation get this catastrophic, and why is it considered one of the most devastating ecological collapses in the United States? The answer lies in decades of human decisions, accidents, and failed control efforts that opened the door to an ecological nightmare. The Burmese python is not native to Florida. Its story begins with the exotic pet trade, which took off in the United States during the 1970s and 80s. These snakes were imported as hatchlings, sold cheaply, and often purchased by people who had no idea how large they would grow. Burmese pythons are one of the largest snake species in the world, capable of reaching lengths over 15 feet and weighing more than 200 pounds. As the snakes grew, many pet owners were unable or unwilling to care for them, leading to deliberate releases into the wild. For years, the numbers were small, and it was assumed that tropical snakes would not survive Florida's winters. But then came the pivotal event, Hurricane Andrew in 1992. Hurricane Andrew was one of the most destructive hurricanes in American history, flattening entire neighborhoods and killing dozens of people. Hidden within that disaster was another consequence. Reptile breeding facilities in South Florida were destroyed, allowing countless non-native snakes, lizards, and other reptiles to escape into the wild. Among them were Burmese pythons. In the warm, humid climate of the Everglades, they not only survived but thrived. By the early 2000s, scientists began documenting breeding populations in the wild. Within a decade, it became clear that this was no small problem. Pythons were multiplying by the thousands, spreading through wetlands, forests, and even into suburban backyards. Today, estimates suggest there are tens of thousands of Burmese pythons in Florida, with some biologists warning the real number could exceed 100,000. The impact on native wildlife has been catastrophic. In some areas, small mammals have essentially disappeared. Studies comparing wildlife surveys from the 1990s to those in the 2000s showed a 99% drop in raccoons, a 98% drop in opossums, and a 94% decline in bobcats. Marsh rabbits, foxes, and other small species were almost entirely wiped out. Larger animals were not spared. Scientists have documented pythons killing adult deer and, in several high-profile cases, swallowing alligators whole. These shocking images, often shared online and in the media, captured public attention, but behind the headlines was a deeper crisis. Florida's ecosystems were unraveling. This collapse matters because every species is linked to the stability of the environment. When raccoons, opossums, and rabbits disappear, predators that rely on them, such as bobcats and owls, struggle to survive. When pythons devour wading birds, turtles, and alligators, the balance of wetlands is disrupted. Without natural checks and balances, rodent populations rise, venomous snakes appear more frequently, and diseases carried by these animals pose greater risks to humans. The Everglades is not just a swamp, it is a critical ecosystem that provides water storage, flood control, and habitat for endangered species. Its collapse has consequences that extend far Florida. Faced with this crisis, officials and scientists tried a range of control measures. One of the most publicized efforts was the Python Challenge, a hunting competition where participants were encouraged to capture and kill as many snakes as possible. While the events generated attention and removed hundreds of pythons, they barely made a dent in the overall population. Detection dogs were also deployed, trained to sniff out the scent of pythons along levees and trails. They proved effective at locating snakes in certain areas but could not keep up with the vast, inaccessible terrain of the Everglades. Another innovative approach involved radio tagging male scout snakes. Because male pythons seek out females during the breeding season, following these tagged males often led scientists to hidden nests of large females. This method resulted in the removal of some massive breeding individuals, but again, it was not enough. Despite years of effort, every strategy had the same limitation: the Everglades is too large, too dense, and too wet for humans to control an invasion of this scale. A single female python can lay 50 to 100 eggs in a clutch, meaning even if thousands of snakes are captured, the population can rebound quickly. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was clear that Florida was losing ground. The python problem was no longer an odd wildlife story, it was a full-blown ecological disaster. So what does this mean for people living outside the Everglades? That is the part of the story many overlook. Ecosystem collapse is not just about losing animals, it is about losing the natural systems that protect human communities. Without healthy predator-prey balances, rodents multiply unchecked, bringing with them risks of disease and crop destruction. Without stable wetlands, water quality declines, and flood risks increase. Encounters with venomous snakes rise as ecosystems become unstable. In other words, when the Everglades suffers, Florida suffers too, and the ripple effects can reach across the southeastern United States. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.